Welcome to the pod focusing on the aftermath and recovery from the devastating Palisades fires of January 2025. Journalist Joel Pollack, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, and technology expert Ron Goldschmidt serve up to the moment vital news and information, discuss the ongoing recovery efforts, and introduce us to the individuals and trades who are playing key roles in rebuilding our cherished communities. We're diving into the deep end and learning quickly how we can move forward together. We know the pain because we're living real-time news, stories, resources, and insights on the ongoing recovery effort. Buckle up. We're three homeless guys.
Welcome to Three Homeless Guys, the podcast about the Palisades fire and the rebuilding effort. I'm journalist Joel Pollack with technology expert Ron Goldschmidt and entrepreneur Oren Ezra. And today we're very pleased to welcome back our city council member, Traci Park, who represents the 11th district and has really been in the forefront of fighting for our community. And she's here. We're going to dive right into it because of a controversy that has exploded over the last week or so, and it involves a lot of overlapping issues such as low-income housing in the Palisades fire and Eaton fire areas, the creation of a rebuilding resilience authority, or maybe I got that wrong, it's RRA, some kind of new level of local government that was recommended by a county blue ribbon commission. There are other versions of the idea, and all of this is happening as Governor Gavin Newsom signed or allocated $101 million for low-income housing in the burn areas. This has people confused and sometimes very upset. So we wanted to bring City Council member Traci Park onto the podcast to explain exactly what is going on. And thank you for being here. I know it's a lot to deal with, but let's try to separate these issues at first and talk about the big picture, which I think involves low-income housing or affordable housing. This was something that Rick Caruso and Steve Soboroff, the original recovery director, were debating. Soboroff was saying that you have to have affordable housing in the rebuild. Caruso was saying we already had affordable housing. While that was going on, residents were worried about what the future would really look like. This is still a question, and the governor now has allocated this amount of money. So let's talk about that, and then we'll get into the local authorities that might or might not be created and how that plays into the low-income housing issue.
Well, Joel, hi. Thank you for having me back. Ron, Oren, it's great to see you guys again. I'm glad that we're able to make the time to have this really important conversation because, Joel, as you pointed out, there are a number of overlapping issues that are all sort of coming to a head and getting sort of packaged in one conversation. And I think it's important that, we parse these issues out. And, changes in the way that the Palisades is rebuilt is something that has been top of mind for, I think, all of us from day one. And you may remember that, from the outset, my advice to community members has been hold on to your property, don't make hasty decisions, don't sell. If you have a way to hold on, try to do that because we have a lot to work through with insurance and financial relief and processes and timelines. And I still don't think all of those questions are answered for a lot of folks. And the concern about ownership turning over has been there from day one, in large part because, once the ownership turns over, there's not a whole lot that a lot of control that local government has anymore. Over the last decade and more, there has been a very strong push from Sacramento to increase density to address the housing crisis across California. And this is true in cities everywhere as they have worked to try to implement the RHNA, that's the Regional Housing Needs Assessment mandates. And here in Los Angeles, our RHNA mandate is to be able to add 450,000 units of new housing by the end of the decade. And so as a process of that, we have seen state law after state law after state law coming down the pike that allow for upzoning. And you see a lot of that density going in, particularly around transit and commercial corridors. And you've seen a lot of policy development in that area. There has also been a push for the addition of affordable housing to address the affordability crisis in Los Angeles and across California. And a lot of the incentives that are available to developers, especially for all affordable projects, are increased height, increased unit counts, and typically no parking mandates. And so we have seen over the last decade and more, as more and more of that kind of housing has come online, challenges with parking, impacts on infrastructure that may or may not be adequate or updated or modernized enough to support all of that additional population and use and strain. And so what we are seeing now is consistent with these policies statewide that call for enhanced density during development. And it has always been a concern as we thought about rebuilding the Palisades, how some of those policies could potentially impact the Pacific Palisades. And now we have this confluence of things that have occurred that put these conversations front and center. I have also been very clear as your council member that my approach to this is that your recovery needs to be community-led and government-supported. And I have been on the ground in hundreds of meetings. I have spoken to thousands of people over the last 6 months who have been impacted by the fire. I am very, very clear that you all need to take the driving role in thinking about what you want your community to look like, what your priorities and projects are, and working with me in my office to develop the timelines and policies for how we're going to rebuild. And so I tend to hesitate when it comes to policy positions or legislation or the creation of new government authorities that may impede my ability and your ability to be at the helm in how we are designing the Palisades and what those priorities are going to be. So a lot of table setting there, but we are now faced with a number of things that folks really need to think through and spend some time providing meaningful feedback to the decision makers who are ultimately going to decide whether or not a rebuilding authority is created. And we should talk about the funding that the government that the governor has made available and what that might mean for Palisades.
All right, so the issue of the community controlling its own destiny, I think, is really the heart of this, because many things happened at once in the last week or so. When the governor announced that he was devoting this money to low-income housing, and at the same time, you have the county and state apparently moving forward on creating this new local authority, which some people said was going to be used to purchase burned lots and then use them for the creation of low-income housing. A lot of people felt, first of all, that decisions were being made without their input and control, especially when this Blue Ribbon Commission was introduced to many people for the first time, because much of what it did was not public or accessible. And second, the question of not having any ability, as you put it, to pull it together to rebuild our own properties, because there are many people still struggling with the insurance and the construction costs. So something else is going ahead while we're not getting the help that we need to get back to where we were. And I think that's the reason for the frustration. But let's just take the low-income housing piece of that. As many know, there are or were mobile homes in the Malibu Palisades area, and many homes were already affordable, quote unquote, because there were retired couples, for example, living on my street who had bought their homes in the 50s or 60s and bought them very cheaply when they were small bungalows and were still living in them, but living quite affordably, even if they had fixed incomes or low incomes. And now those homes are lost. Those couples will struggle to rebuild if they're not selling already. But there were affordable homes in the Palisades from the perspectives of the people living there already. And that's one of the reasons I think people are reluctant to accept the idea of low-income housing. There's also the fact that everybody knows we have a large homeless population in the city of Los Angeles and LA County. We have a migrant issue that's in all the headlines. And so there's a fear that state and local officials are going to use this tragedy in the Palisades to put people into the community and redistribute the land, essentially, that this is part of a broader plan and it's our bad luck that this happened to us. Some people don't believe it was luck. There are some more conspiratorially minded people who think it was done on purpose, but basically everything in the last week or so has affirmed the fear and suspicion that many people have that our community is going to be used in this way before we have a chance to get on our feet. And the longer the government delays in the permitting reform, the longer the insurance companies delay in the payouts, the more people feel like they can't hang on and they're being forced to accept this outcome. So that's where that comes from. But a lot of people would be okay with affordable housing options. I've heard people say, I'm okay if people who work in the Palisades can live here as well as work here. There are people who do already, but there are people who travel to the Palisades to work. I'm okay with having them live here. I just want to make sure that it's something I can decide that I'm participating in, and I don't feel that that's happening right now.
Yeah. Joel, really astutely put and observed. And, from the outset of this, I have been very clear that my obligation is to the actual victims of this fire. And I want to rebuild the Palisades for the people that spent their lives in the Palisades, for the community that was displaced because of this really traumatic event. I'm not looking for some kind of a corporate land grab or giveaway to try to engineer some new community there. That's not what I am looking to do. And I think that people are rightly upset to learn that $100 million has been made available to corporate developers to add more density when you have actual fire victims that are under or uninsured, that have economic and resource limitations that are impacting their direct ability to rebuild. And that's true for commercial property owners, multifamily housing owners, as well as single family home owners. And I have been in hundreds of meetings and spoken to thousands of people. And the help that they're asking for is access to money that will help them cover the gap for their own rebuilds, and access to capital for people that weren't previously, low interest capital for people that weren't previously in financial products. And so I think that there is a legitimate sense of frustration by the community that this money is being made available for large corporate developers, not to actual individual victims of this fire. And I think that is a real miss here. That said, Joel, you did speak to the diversity of the housing stock in the Pacific Palisades prior to the fire. And I think that is a really important element of the character of the Pacific Palisades. From your mobile home communities to your 100-year-old cottages to actually very modest working class family homes. And yeah, some big mega mansions up on the hillside as well. But you have a lot of folks who come from very, very different sets of circumstances. There are some people in the Palisades who are going to be okay, but there are a whole bunch of people who aren't. And I think that is where the priority needs to be first. Now, because of the proposed rebuilding authority that could have the powers to purchase and acquire land for land banking and potentially some powers of eminent domain, there is a concern that the government could acquire that land or those properties and redevelop it as housing. That could be any kind of housing. It could be workforce housing, senior housing, whatever. And I would like the community to have a voice in identifying what is the housing need that we could fill, if that is what the community wanted the land to be used for. But I don't think anybody's asked you all yet. What are the needs? What would you like to see if the government was going to bank land for reinvestment and redevelopment for community benefits? What are, from your perspective, your community benefits? You all have said that you wanted an LAPD station in the Palisades, a substation, for many, many years. I know there's widespread interest in that. There could be infrastructure or open space projects that make sense. But I want you guys to be the ones to identify those projects. And I worry that a separate authority stood up to make those decisions on your behalf. The way it was proposed by the Blue Ribbon Commission was going to be political appointees, and I think only 2 Palisades residents. That's the wrong way around.
So let's talk about that.
Primarily Palisades residents.
So let's talk about the authority and the Blue Ribbon Commission, because I think it would be good to sketch out what happened and then get to some questions and answers. I know Oren and Ron have several, but my understanding is that the Blue Ribbon Commission was appointed by Supervisor Lindsay Horvath, who's been on our show, and they worked with consultants at the UCLA. I forget which school it was, but essentially they put together this plan for rebuilding, and one of the things that was suggested was this new authority that could capture property taxes and use them for rebuilding. There was another similar idea to create, I think, a county-wide fire district, which I also don't understand in great detail. But this idea of a local authority that would control the tax revenues and keep them local was also proposed by other people. People have been thinking about this idea. In fact, I even think when Senator Ben Allen was on the show, we talked about it with him, because there were some residents who were enthusiastic about the idea, in theory, of having more local control so that Palisades and Malibu residents who share, as you point out, a common ecosystem, could work together to control the rebuild, especially if people didn't have confidence in the city government, county government, state government. So there was a positive side to that idea as well. I think the way it happened and the way many people found out about it, there was a meeting on Zoom recently with Supervisor Horvath that confused a lot of people, unfortunately. And then State Senator Ben Allen, who, again, has been very friendly and open, introduced this legislation, and suddenly everything seemed to be going very quickly. And people can't sort out the different proposals for the different authorities, and they don't know where this came from. And again, it reinforces some of the worst fears, especially when you combine it with the governor's announcement that there's going to be low-income housing. So could you sketch out how these ideas developed? Where did this resilient authority idea come from? What are the different versions of it? And how is it suddenly in legislation and something that could happen without any input from local residents?
Yeah. So a few different things. Financing districts can be created to help focus on utilities and infrastructure. And a couple of years ago, the state legislature created a law that allows for something called a climate resilience district. It is an incremental tax finance tool that's available, can be used in a community that is recovering from a disaster for investment in long-term infrastructure, resilient infrastructure projects. That is a way for right now in the Pacific Palisades, while your property taxes are being reassessed and they're low or next to nothing, over time as you rebuild and properties trade hands on the marketplace, those incremental tax increases are captured locally for investment in your local community and your recovery and your rebuild, long-term infrastructure, sustainable projects for you. That is something that could be stood up to just be Pacific Palisades. Maybe it could also be expanded to include the unincorporated county area and Malibu. We share a coastline, we share PCH, and we share the Santa Monica Mountains, and we are all recovering from the same fire disaster together. That would expand the reach a little bit and allow us to envision and deliver bigger projects. But that is something that you guys should decide. So I introduced legislation to assess that. We as a city are looking at a localized district. That's just tax financing to pay for some infrastructure programs. What the County Blue Ribbon Commission has suggested is much, much broader. This is what they are calling a resilient rebuilding authority. And in the County Blue Ribbon Commission report, it suggests that that independent agency be stood up, that it have a board primarily composed of subject matter experts, not local residents. And I do take issue with that. I think it should be primarily residents if they're going to do it. As an entity, that authority could issue and it could manage incremental tax financing. It could issue bonds. It could, and as it's been proposed currently, could have broader powers to acquire and purchase land, to bank it. There are other elements of design and fire resilience standards that could be delegated to that authority. There are some things about an authority that make some sense. I don't want to give land use control, zoning control necessarily away, but an independent authority that has the ability to carry financing and issue bonds, to hold contracts, for example, to secure in advance of the rebuild materials. You all are going to need concrete and appliances and steel and other things that they could be purchased at an economy of scale that might involve some cost savings for people who are trying to rebuild. So there are some elements of the concept that I'm open to. And I have said that to Senator Allen and Supervisor Horvath from the outset. But when the commission issued its recommendations, I was not convinced that the people of the Pacific Palisades were aware that there even was a Blue Ribbon Commission, or that it had issued recommendations that the county was looking to advance that necessarily impact your rights and your voice. And the county's recommendation ties their rebuilding authority proposal in many ways to transit and to density. And it, in a lot of ways, treats the Pacific Palisades as urban infill. The Pacific Palisades is not urban infill. It is an extraordinarily challenging coastal community with substandard roads and canyons and hillsides with limited ingress and egress. And so I take issue with some of the way that report came out, and I don't agree with the way the county had proposed broadly assigning a lot of that responsibility to the authority. And while I am open to it, this is the kind of thing that needs to be a community conversation and needs to be based on the input. What are the actual needs of the Pacific Palisades and the county and Malibu if we want to do a more regional approach with an authority? But I just wasn't convinced at the outset that you all were aware of it. And the report from the Blue Ribbon Commission dropped on, a Friday afternoon, and there were pending other legislative deadlines a week later. And so things happened very, very quickly. And I really want to thank Senator Allen and Supervisor Horvath, who I think recognize that the community has questions. And I know that Senator Allen has assured me and many of you that he's not going to advance the state bill to create this unless and until he's sure that there is broad community support for it. So I very much appreciate that. I think that the Senate bill at this point is moving through the typical process. It goes over to the Assembly Local Government Committee. And then I think the state will go into their recess in August. And if it comes out of that Assembly Committee, it would be picked up by the Assembly Appropriations Committee. And if any amendments are made to it along the way, it would need to go all the way back to the Senate for a vote. So Senator Allen has assured me and many of you that there will be plenty of opportunities to provide input and make amendments. And so I really appreciate that spirit of cooperation. But I think, unfortunately, because of some of the timelines, we're doing this in the wrong order. The cart was being put before the horse here. We needed to do the community engagement first and get a feel for what we thought the needs of the community are, and then what is the appropriate scope of responsibility that should go to an authority if we're going to create one at all. And like I said, there are some things an authority could do that could be very helpful for us. On the other hand, I am not totally convinced that we need another layer of bureaucracy anywhere in the process.
Right. If it's not helping, why add it? Let me just add a couple of comments and then throw it to Ron. But the legislation, SB 549 is the bill, and that went through the Senate and is going to the Assembly. I said that no residents were consulted for the Blue Ribbon Commission. Some residents were, and I think people participated with good intentions. I was told about it after they had a draft, and I was invited to a meeting with the authors, which I appreciated. And the comment I made, among a few others, was that the title they had for the document, which is Climate Action and Fire Safe Recovery, should really have reversed the terms, because when you put the climate action part first, to me, that sends the message to residents that you care about this big climate issue first, and then the recovery issue is sort of secondary. You could still have the word climate in there, just reverse them, make it about recovery and rebuilding and climate in a broader sense, but put recovery and rebuilding first. They didn't listen, so they have this report. I think that's part of also why people are upset, because they, again, feel like they were overlooked. There's a bigger issue, a bigger agenda. And I want to just ask one thing just to clarify. So the Resilient Rebuilding Authority, the RRA, which is the county proposal, that has or would have broad powers, and the Climate Resilience District, the CRD, would have smaller powers. It would have fewer powers, I guess, but it would have access to funding. Is that the major difference between the two?
Yeah, it's infrastructure focused, and we have a lot of issues related to infrastructure in the Pacific Palisades. One of the big ones, of course, is the watershed. This is 2025. It's insane that we are depositing toxic sludge and runoff right onto the sand in the Santa Monica Bay. We have an opportunity to redesign that and do a better job of protecting our coastline and managing stormwater runoff. That's something that, the Climate Resilience District could capture those property tax increases incrementally over time to fund. There could be other infrastructure projects, utility related things like that make sense. So it's focused on infrastructure. The rebuilding authority proposed by the county has much, much broader powers conferred to it. It is not just infrastructure, raising money for infrastructure. It would include everything from housing and transit to land banking to whatever else. Ultimately, legislatively is decided what the scope of their responsibility will be. And I want to be very, very precise about what that scope of responsibility is going to be. If an authority is in fact going to be stood up, not only does it need to have the right governance structure, but we should be very, very clear about what it is able to and not able to do. And I did want to just mention, these commissioners that were appointed to deliver this product, those folks were volunteers selected to participate because of academic and highly specialized subject matter expertise. A couple of them are actually residents of the Palisades. And I know some folks have taken a lot of arrows just from having participated on this. And, I want to caution people to recognize that those folks were there to offer opinions on things like coastal protection and watershed. And they are not the legislators. They are not the ones who are now tasked with creating or not creating an authority, right? These were just some academic and informed opinions and recommendations. And so I wanted to point that out, that, these were folks that were doing what they were asked to do. And so, let's, as a community, let's talk to our elected officials at this point. That's whose hands these decisions are in.
All right. Over to you, Ron.
Yeah, no, I just want to go directly to the audience questions because we open it up, and I have my own questions that maybe I'll leave for a little bit later. But in the interest of time, Tracy, one of our listeners is asking what steps are being taken to assist to assist condo and townhome owners and HOAs and apartment building owners in being able to return to the Palisades. Wouldn't one of the best defenses for increased density to assist these condo and townhomes, HOAs, trailer parks, apartments, in covering the insurance rebuild cost gap so that these lots are not sold to low-income housing developers and instead are given to current residents?
And Ron, it's a great question. And I think it speaks to that frustration about we have people who are actually impacted, who lost homes, who don't have the money or the ability to rebuild. And instead of making this funding available to them, to the people who actually lost their apartment building or their condo or their mobile home community, we're handing it off to corporate developers. And that worries me that we are going to see those corporate land grabs. The mobile home communities are two that I worry very, very much about. And if there was an appropriate opportunity for, the government to intervene to ensure that that important component of our housing stock is kept, maybe that does make some sense. For the existing multifamily housing that was already in the Palisades, that needs to come back, which is why we've, created the like for like process with the expedited permitting. Those property owners may be able to add additional units. And those are the types of conversations that we should be having as a community. But those are the owners that I want to make this funding available to. And those are the people, those are the victims who need to have these direct relief packages. I would have preferred to see this $100 million put into a grant program for individuals that were under or uninsured or who otherwise lack the resources to rebuild, and the remainder of that put into a low interest financial product made available to people who need access to capital to get them through the rebuilding process. That's what I would like to have seen this money be.
So let me ask you a follow-up. I just want to be very tactical about this question. Is like, it sounds to me, and I'm not a big political expert, that there is a lot of support from the politicians to get this rebuilding authority done. And aside from you, I've not heard a lot of voices against it. So wouldn't it make sense that this will actually happen? I can tell you the community is, almost in mutiny about it because, I've been getting a lot of very, very direct questions about the authority, about the Newsom bill. Um, wouldn't this like, with all the hearings and everything's to come, why are we at the stage where this is even on the table when the community is so against it? But there haven't been a lot of voices against it except for yours.
Well, and I'm not necessarily against the concept. There are some functions that a regional authority could be very helpful for. Like I said, managing, issuing bonds and managing financing and holding contracts. Those are two really, I can't do that as a council office. And so a regional authority who could help with some of that makes sense. So I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea, but this is something that we as a community need to talk about in advance. What authority do we want to give this new government agency? How do we want that agency to be set up? Who is going to be on that board making the decisions? What will be the cadence of their meetings? And I'm just not, as I said a moment ago, even yet totally convinced that we need another bureaucracy created for this. I don't know that with the amount of time and taxpayer money that it is going to take to stand this organization up, get it staffed, find it a place to live, hire it legal counsel. I mean, look, we as a city council for City of Los Angeles, we have city council meetings 3 days a week, and I'm in committees 4 days a week, and we can't get anything done. So I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but I genuinely am not convinced that more government is always the best solution. And which is part of the reason I think this should have started with a community conversation about, here are some specific challenges that we're having as a community. Here are the people who need relief and the kind of relief that they need. And here's a list of 10 projects that we would like government commitment to support. I would have preferred to have that conversation and then build the authority around it. So I am hopeful now that we can work with the state partners to do that conversation over the summer. And if it turns out there is need and support for us to create this regional authority, then let's put the appropriate guardrails around it so that we are getting what we need and not a bunch of bureaucracy that we don't.
How is that interest going to be gauged? Like, is it going to be gauged from Palisades residents? Is it going to be gauged from the entire like LA County, the state? Because I can tell you that the residents are not excited about the Resilient Authority, and especially they would be a lot more excited about getting direct funding for their rebuild efforts. So, is this going to be again like a much wider political issue where the Palisades, quite frankly, are going to take a back seat to everybody else's thoughts?
Well, I don't want that to happen, which is part of the reason I sounded the alarm about this on July 1st when the commission recommendations dropped and I realized that, this was going to happen quickly, that we needed to have these conversations about it. I can tell you tomorrow night, the Pacific Palisades Community Council is going to be taking up the question of a regional authority. I believe that Senator Allen will be there to answer questions and talk about it. I'm in regular communication with Senator Allen as well. He and I are likely to spend time doing community meetings that are available to folks to elicit that feedback. One of the things that I will just share with you, you may remember as a council office, we put out some surveys and asked people about their rebuilding plans and timelines. And we also asked folks, for those of you that are still undecided about whether or not to rebuild or whether to sell, what are the primary issues that you're facing? And so we have about 1,000 responses to those surveys. And those include people whose properties burned as well as who still have standing homes. I don't purport that this is scientific, but we already have a lot of data that's unique to Palisades that I think can and should help inform what our next steps are as a community. And so I'm in the process of pulling that together, and I'm going to be presenting that to the community as well through my own series of community meetings. I'm going to be at the Pacific Palisades Community Council as well with these issues. And so, I think it's really important, and I've been very, very clear about this, that this continue to be community-led and government supported. What you guys, I know what you want. What you want is real help or for us to get out of your way. And I hear you loud and clear on that. And so that's why I have concerns about these things. If creating a regional authority gets other bureaucracy out of your way and it speeds you up and it delivers you what you want at the end of the day, then by all means, let's have that conversation and let's do that. But I wasn't on this commission, and I didn't write the legislation that's pending. And my job as your council member is to be your advocate and represent your interests. And so I don't want my voice on your behalf sidelined in those conversations. And so that's why I'm reluctant to give up too much authority to another government agency.
Before we throw it to Oren, I just want to repeat the details you mentioned. There's going to be a meeting of the PPCC on Thursday, July 17th at 6 p.m. Pacific on Zoom. Senator Allen is going to speak there. They mention your letter, Councilmember Park, and if you want to follow the meeting, the details are at www.pacpalicc.org, pacpalicc.org, so you can follow along with that meeting. And really, just again, before I throw to Oren, I think it's really important to note that you did raise the alarm and you took the initiative of writing that letter. So I think a lot of the concerns that community members are feeling right now are reflected in what you've pointed out. And I think you've done an admirable job in pulling this back into a dialogue with credible community institutions. And so that will be happening on July 17th. Obviously, some people will be listening to this podcast or watching this podcast afterwards, but you can go again to that web address. I'm sure there'll be information about this or a recording of that meeting at www.pacpalicc.org. Let's see if Oren
and just
is
quick,
ready.
Joel, to
Yes,
your
go ahead.
listeners who may or may not be familiar, the Pacific Palisades Community Council is your local neighborhood democracy. Those are your representatives. There are committees that talk about everything from parks and forestry and trees to now the rebuilding committee. The Pacific Palisades Community Council serves in an advisory capacity to me as your council member. And I personally work very, very closely with PPCC and take my lead legislatively from what your local community council is suggesting and recommending. So I just want you guys to know that they are there to help advise me in the positions that I take on things. So I really encourage folks to get involved with the local community council. It's a public platform. I attend those meetings. My staff is at every single one of the meetings on a regular basis, and that was true before the fire, and that will always continue to be true. But I personally go as well.
Great. So, Tracy, thank you so
Go
much
ahead, Oren.
for everything you're doing, first of all. I have a couple of questions. First of all, we're talking about, like, I don't know, $100 million, right? And I think something that you mentioned is, like, if you take this $100 million and you divide it by all of us that our house burned down, each one will get $10,000. $10,000 is probably 1% of whatever we need to build. But if we take this money and we take it toward the people that were underinsured, or the people that has condos, like Ron mentioned, this could really be a help. And I think that everybody is spending now a lot of time about this thing where there are like 4 or 5 issues that we didn't get any help at all until today. Nobody helped, and I'm talking like, is Oren a person that like his house burned down? I'm not looking now on the macro, I'm not looking now at what can be done in terms of infrastructure and stuff like this. I'm just like, I'm thinking to myself, how long it will take me from now until I'm getting back to my house. Now, even if I can build my house in a year or two, Palisade, nobody will be able, and I'm saying it from day one, nobody will be able to live over there in the next 5 years. It's going to be like a construction zone. Right now, it's actually the best time to live there because construction didn't start, the lots are clear, the view is gorgeous. But let's go back and talk about debris for a second, right? Until today, the people that their debris was removed by the Army Corps of Engineers don't know how much they're going to be charged. That's one thing that nobody answered. None of these people that the Army Corps of Engineers cleared their debris. A lot of the lots stayed with like the debris of wood and shred and like trees that they needed to pay for it, right? That's like just on the debris side. Then insurance money. We don't get any help in getting the insurance money from our insurance company. Nobody helped us at all. And again, guys, if anybody knows anything about it, please tell me because I didn't get any help. I'm still like trying to get my money from the insurance. It's a constant fight every day. So this is the second thing. The third thing is the mortgage, right? The mortgage company got like from my insurance company, they got almost like $500,000 already. They're holding it. Right? I need to beg to get this money. They're making money on top of this money. I'm making a very small percentage of what nobody help us over there, right? Then we're talking about it will be 5 years until we really can go back and live over there. The fires were the fault of the city, of the county, of the of the state, right? They didn't make sure that the brush is clean. Fire department, not fire, sorry. The gas company didn't shut off the gas valves. My house exploded. My house didn't burn down. My house exploded. So nobody helping us over there as well, like in somehow to like, okay, how am I going to hold my property and pay for the next 5 years mortgage? So in all of these things, in all the things that we really, and again, Tracy, it's not like, I think the first thing that I heard in the last like 6 months that can really help people is like, hey, let's take this $100 million and help the people that really need it. But there is these 5 points that nobody is helping us. Nobody. If you can, again, guys, please educate me if somebody heard any help on the debris, any help on the insurance money, any help on the mortgage, any help on like how are we going to sustain these mortgages and how are we, what are we going to do in the next 5 years? Permitting, like it's nobody really knows what's going to happen. I love your idea, Tracy, of like maybe securing some I don't know, like concrete or whatever we need, but all of these things are not happening. All the people that are sitting over there, why don't they come and say, hey, you know what, let's take this money, let's take the time that we have and let's plan a city that is like totally different. Let's plan a city that has enough green areas that can stop the fire, that has parks. I don't know if people know, but like Joel, I think you mentioned it. In the Palisade, there is only one big park. There is not even like, if you want to walk on the street, there is not even like anywhere to sit in the middle of it. In our neighborhood in Sunset Mesa, the same thing. So I think that like, again, Tracy, you holding a very important position. And I think that those are the things that bother us. And yesterday we had a quick call, me, Joel, and Ron. And I said, and again, I think that we're not enough people that nobody will really care about us. People think that like the Palisade, everybody is like, oh, this is the rich people of California. So we're not like a big political power. And I don't see any help coming our way.
Oren, I hear your frustration loud and clear. And all of those unresolved issues that you're talking about are what are keeping people still mired in uncertainty. The ability to cover the gaps between what insurance will cover and the actual cost of rebuild is going to be a different financial pain point for every individual family. the timelines, or, and, you're saying it's 5 years until people can live there. We got a sense from some of the survey work we did, among the things that are important to folks is the schools and the reopening of schools. You mentioned not having enough park space, but access to opening and functioning parks. So we're excited that the rec center and the playground there are going to be reopening. The programming is going to be coming back into the old gym. Adequate amount of retail and other amenities to support everyday life, grocery stores, dry cleaners, there's essential amenities that you need to have. But it's the insurance piece and the financial piece are the two biggest factors that are impeding people in their ability to rebuild. And I think unless and until those two questions are resolved, mortgage relief and modification programs for people that were in loans and access to new capital, low interest capital for people that are going to need a loan to rebuild, and then grant relief for folks, that are going to have trouble covering the gap. And so I hear the frustration that people can't move forward until those two things are resolved. I don't know that we need to create a separate regional authority to resolve those issues. The governor and the insurance commissioner, other state leaders, we can do this at the county and the city level as well. Need to get the insurance and the banking industry to the table, get the guidelines that are necessary so that you all know that, one, you can get insurance during rebuild and that your home will be insurable when you're done. And we need the banking industry to create the modification and access to capital programs. Or the government can take $100 million that we're going to give away to corporate
100%.
developers and make it available to the actual victims who need it. And that is what I would like to see happen. And I think that would go a lot further because
and
of
by the way, I'm
issues
saying
that you've
5 years
identified,
because
Lauren.
think about it. Like, I don't know if you ever had construction right next to you. I had construction right next to me. It's like really hard to live. But think about it, that like 80% of the houses right next to you is going to get rebuilt. You're not, even if you have like parks open and you have centers and supermarkets and schools and everything, who can live in a place that 80% of the neighborhood is being rebuilt? Nobody. And I think that, like, with all due respect to the governor, he's doing like nothing other than like photo ops and stuff like this. I haven't seen anything happened from not like the city level, county level, California, or federal level that helping us. Nothing. Other than the Army Corps of Engineer coming over here, there is a lot of money that somebody made over here that we don't know how. The Army Corps of Engineer came with like a lot of power, taking jobs from the people that live over here. And until now, nobody knows how much money they're going to get charged for it, which is crazy to me. Everybody is just talking, oh, look, it's great, 6 months, everything is clear. Yes. Who is getting the money? Where is the money came from? And where? How much are we going to get charged? Why is it so hard to say January 8th, hey, each lot is going to get charged like X amount of money? I don't get it. When I came to the company that cleared my lot, I got a quote immediately. So why is it so hard? And this is just the first stage that we went through. This is why I'm going back to this stage. But there is going to be like so many stages like this. Why can nobody come and like do a rule? Hey, all the money that sit in the bank right now for your from your insurance, all the interest that the bank is making on it, it's going directly to you. Like, why nobody is working on? I haven't heard anybody is working on pushing something like this. Why anybody is holding the insurance companies accountable for the money that they owe us? Why do I need to show how many pairs of underwear I had and how much each one of them cost? No, it's like you know what, guys, we're laughing,
Yeah.
but me and Ron went through like making this list. I can't even tell you, me, my son, my wife, how many hours we spent on making a list, crazy list, and until now we didn't finish the list, and I didn't get my money yet. Why is nobody like dealing with this issue? That's what I'm trying to understand. This $100 million, great. It's not a big amount. I agree with you, Tracy. This money need to go to the people that were underinsured, to the people that were living in condos. Yes, everybody is spending money and their time on like this $100 million. Come on, we all know $100 million is what like the Palisades is paying in property taxes, or probably even more per year, right? And now listen, end of the day, I understand why it's
Right.
happening. It's happening because they don't want like somebody Joe Schmo that bought his house 50 years ago, Joel, right? And he's paying property taxes of like $5,000 a year. They don't want him to live anymore over there. They want somebody that will buy the land from him for like $3-4 million, and they will pay 25 or 50 or $60,000 a year. And the fact that they put whoever built Playa Vista to be the first person that came on to try and help the Palisade. I've been mentioning it like since the beginning. Tells me a lot of what's happening in the back end, things that we cannot see. That's where it's going, and that's what we see that it's going.
Let me just ask that following up. I tend to be optimistic about the future, and one of our former guests, Kate Steinspear, put up an amazing montage of photos of wood frames going up in Palisades. So I think there are people who are able to rebuild, and some of my neighbors are getting their permits, and so there are some things moving forward. But what about that question of intent that Oren alluded to? Are there people who are trying to make this difficult so that the property will turn over to people who will pay higher taxes, or so that people can say we resettled X number of homeless people or migrants or whatever it is? How much of this is intentional? Every time we have another hurdle, and we've also had to make a list, even though fortunately our house survived, we had to claim compensation for 80% of our belongings because it was all smoke damaged. We also had to go through a list, and then just to give a small example, we had a whole spreadsheet, and then our insurance company sent us their spreadsheet, and the two formats were incompatible. So it took another several weeks to move the data from one spreadsheet to another. And my wife said, this has to be deliberate. It's another delay tactic. How deliberate is this process of making it difficult and then rapidly moving forward? And I ask for another reason also. There's another law that I neglected to mention, but just a few weeks ago, Governor Newsom signed a law that reverses the California Environmental Quality Act requirements on that urban infill, making it easier to build low-income housing in urban areas. And people were celebrating it as a rollback of regulations. You never hear about that in California. And I said, wait a minute. There's something else happening after this. And I'm not a conspiracy theory-minded person, but I said, that's going to make it easier to build those kinds of units in the Palisades, because suddenly you've got all this land. All of a sudden, look, there are other reasons he's doing it as well. I mean, I think he might be running for president. He wants to show that he's more moderate than his party or whatever. But how much of this is intentional, as Oren said? I mean, are there people trying to do what Oren suggested, which is to achieve these redistributive goals or higher property tax revenue or whatever it is?
I think that there are groups, organizations, and individuals that do have certain goals. Let me just say, having to itemize your losses with the insurance companies and write those lists. I didn't lose my home. I didn't have losses like that, but I can only imagine laying in bed at night ruminating about what was in that drawer, what was in that closet, what was in that box in the garage. That must be a particular kind of hell. I don't know why the insurance companies won't, the entire place burned down, just pay to the policy limits. Do I think there might be some stonewalling by insurance companies that's deliberate? Yeah, maybe. That is not beyond me to say yes, that could be happening. There is no orchestrated effort by the government that I'm aware of, and if there is, I'm not a part of it, to create delays or issues that would cause people to need to sell, to encourage properties to turn over. But do I think that there are some elected officials out there that want to use this as an opportunity and a platform to push other policy goals? Yeah. Have I been worried about that from the outset? Yes. Have I been worried about corporate developers buying out property and changing the way your community looks and feels? One of the things about the Palisades that I think is so important is your community character. The Palisades is a very different, unique community that grew up over a century. We already talked about the diversity of the housing stock. And I worry that it becomes an opportunity for people, to shove policy goals in that may or may not be consistent with your needs or interests or your safety. And I say that specifically related to the addition of density, any kind of density, without concurrent investment in adequate infrastructure and capacity to support it, especially your evacuation routes. It is an absolute miracle that no one died trying to evacuate the Palisades on January 7th. It is an absolute miracle. And I am not convinced that adding more people without thoroughly assessing the impacts on infrastructure and evacuation routes makes any sense. And I also think we have pushed as far into the urban wild interface as we can get away with. So we are geography challenged, and we have to be very, very careful and smart about what we build and where we build it and how we do it.
That evacuation issue is the primary reason that I set up the nonprofit volunteer fire department in Marquez Knolls, because I was just shocked at the evacuation problems, and we didn't have police directing traffic. And hopefully in the future, we will have a network of volunteers who can do that. I want to just mention one thing before we do one last round here, and I go to Ron for some of his closing comments. But I do want to give a little bit of credit to Ben Allen, because he did actually introduce a bill to address this issue of the list and to force the insurance companies to pay out. And just to give people who may not be familiar with the list a sense of how difficult these lists are, our house survived, our property survived, even though most of it was damaged beyond repair. But just to give you an idea of the numbers of items in the spreadsheet, there were 10,000 items, of which we could save 20%. So we removed 20% of the items. So the final list we sent to the insurance company was 8,000 items. And some of those were repeats of other, in other words, you'd say silverware was one item, but it would be like 48 pieces. So 8,000 is actually an underestimate of the individual items, but let's just say 8,000 lines. Now try doing that when you've lost your house and you have to remember everything and you can't take pictures of things to estimate their value or remember where you got them. So that's how hard it is. And it just takes forever. Even when you have the things, it takes a long time. Let's go to Ron. And Ron's been just a very passionate defender of the community's interests here. So I really want to thank him as well for bringing this issue up.
I mean, I've always, again, Tracy, thank you for coming on the show. And, I'm a little pessimistic because I haven't heard, aside from your voice, which, I think the community is rallying behind in the Palisades, I haven't heard a lot of voices that are saying what you're saying. And again, to echo Oren's frustration, I just see a direct line between the finances and the residents not being there. And that needs to happen in order for people to get back on their feet so they can stay, they can rebuild, and these fights that we're fighting against the insurance companies, and I'm fighting the same battle every week. Zero answers, delays, people not coming on the phone, just folks like not responding to us at all and just delaying. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that it is absolutely intentional, just having gone through it. And yet there's nobody calling these folks to account. I mean, maybe one day that will happen, but that day is not right now. We're fighting too many battles. So I guess my question is more like tactical is like, how do we, aside from showing up at these community meetings, which I think people have been doing, this 20,000 letters sent, I see the community being very strong, very vocal. Like, if you're the only one that's like of this opinion, is this a losing battle? I guess that's the question.
No, I don't think this is a losing battle, not at all. I think that Senator Allen and Supervisor Horvath both will hear the community out. I think, I have spoken more to Senator Allen over the last couple of days because of Senate Bill 549 and the fact that this is now moving forward at the state level. And he has been very, very clear with me and has assured me, and I believe others, that, he introduced this to be a placeholder and that he wants to hear from the community and that he is not going to move forward a bill that there at the end of the day isn't support for. Ron, I think I think the frustration you're expressing is the frustration that I have too. The community engagement should have happened first. And, whether or not there were deadlines pending and things had to be moved quickly, it's a shame that we're coming back kind of after the fact to have that conversation. And, my voice on it is what my voice is. I'm open to the concept, but if we're going to do this, we need to think it through. We need to get it right. And I don't want to do it without the support of the community. And I don't want to do it in a way that impedes my ability to be your effective advocate. I don't want to give away my role in helping you guys rebuild this community for you. So I think that this is not necessarily a done deal. I think that Senator Allen is going to hear you out. And I think that, to the extent that Supervisor Horvath pursues issues or programs like that at the county level, I think she'll hear you out. And I'm going to take my feedback from you all, and my positions are ultimately going to come from what we decide as a community we think the right thing is. So this is not a done deal yet.
Oren, any last thoughts?
No, thank you very much, Tracy. I think that people in your position need to understand that you guys are dealing with a lot of issues in the macro level, but try to think of take as example Oren that has to deal with insurance, has to deal with debris removal, has to deal with even one win, even if we get one win over the insurance, if we get one win, I think I end up not going with Army Corps of Engineers. But if you guys can go to the Army Corps of Engineers and tell them, hey, by end of the month, tell exactly each family how much money they're going to get charged. We just need one win because we didn't have any until today.
Well, we did get one win today, which was that Tracy came on the program at very short notice. And it is great that you're so responsive. And I know that people in the community are deeply appreciative of everything you're doing in what is an extremely difficult situation. So thank you again for joining us. And for more, you can find us at 3homelessguys.com. You can write to us at pod@3homelessguys.com. And until next time, this is Joel, Ron, and Oren saying, stay strong.
Great. Thank you so much.
That was great. Tracy, I think people will really watch this.
Thanks for listening to Three Homeless Guys. If this episode hit home, please subscribe to our channel. Check out 3homelessguys.com for RSS feeds to your favorite streaming service. Follow us on social and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Drop us a review or shoot us a message at pod@3homelessguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Stay strong, and we'll catch you next time.